There are cruelties that need a knife, and there are cruelties that need only an audience. The cadres of Ashcot Park understood the second kind perfectly. They had taken in their dead cousin's daughter out of duty, kept her out of habit, and used her for 11 years as the plain gray thing you set beside a bright one to make the bright one brighter. So, when Selina Cadre found the little book, she did not burn it. She did not even read all of it. She read enough to know what it was, and then she waited 9 days for a table large enough to deserve it. 22 people, candles down the whole length, a duke at her mother's right hand, and a book of love letters written by a spinster to a man who had never once told her his name. What Selina did not know, what nobody in that county knew, was that the letters had all been answered. It began, as most of it began, with the war. In the autumn of 1810, the ladies of the parish of Ashcot formed a committee. They called it the Ladies' Committee for the Comfort of the Army, which was a very grand name for what it actually was, which was 31 women in a cold church hall rolling bandages and knitting stockings for men they would never meet. Frances Marlowe was 17. She was the vicar's daughter, and she was there because her father was the vicar, and she had come expecting to knit badly for 2 hours and go home. Instead, she found the letter list. It was a scheme run out of London, and it worked like this. There were men in the army who received nothing, no parcel, no note, not one line in 3 years, orphans, foundlings, men whose people had died while they were at sea, or who had gone for a soldier because there was nobody at home who cared whether they went. The committee in London had names of officers willing to distribute letters, and the parishes supplied the letters, and the whole arrangement ran on 2 absolute rules. No lady would give her full name for the sake of her reputation. No soldier would give his for the sake of his pride. Each correspondence was assigned a number. Frances Marlowe was given number 41. She wrote to him for the first time on the 14th of November, 1810, sitting at the kitchen table of the vicarage with a tallow candle and her father's second-best pen, and she had absolutely no idea what to say. So she told him the truth. She wrote that she had been given a number and no other thing whatsoever, that she did not know if he was 18 or 50, that she did not know if he could read, and that if he could not, she hoped whoever was reading this aloud to him was a friend and not a wit. She wrote that the church roof at Ashcot had a hole in it in the shape of Ireland. She wrote that her father had preached for 40 minutes on Sunday about patience, and that 4 people had fallen asleep, and that one of them had been her father's own church warden, and that she had counted. She sealed it and sent it, and expected nothing at all, because she was 17 and not a fool. The answer came in March. It had crossed Spain in a saddlebag and come home in the bottom of a mail packet, and it had been rained on somewhere in between, and the ink had run at the corner. It was written in pencil, in a hard, slanted hand, on the back of a printed quartermaster's form. It said that the roof of the church at Ashcot sounded a great deal better than the roof he was currently under, which was a tree. It said that he could read, "Thank you," and that the friend reading it aloud was neither a friend nor a wit, but a Welshman named Price, who had opinions about the churchwarden. It said that he had not received a letter in 9 years. It was not signed. Frances read it 4 times, standing up in the passage, with her cloak still on. Then she sat down on the stairs and read it again, slowly. That became the shape of it. Frances read every letter he sent twice, once quickly, standing up, wherever she happened to be, to know that he was alive, once slowly, sitting down, at night, to know who he was. She told him so, in the second winter, and he wrote back that he had begun doing the same, and that he was ashamed of how quickly the first reading went. They wrote for 3 winters. She sent him Ashcot, the hole in the roof, the flood in the churchyard that brought 2 coffins up, her father's decline, the bull that got into the vestry. She sent him a pressed primrose in 1812, and he wrote that he had carried it in the crown of his shako until Badajoz, and that after Badajoz he had not been able to find his shako or for 2 days. His company, he sent her Spain, not the glory of it, of which there was none, but the strange domestic detail of it, that the men made tea in a helmet, that the worst thing was not the fighting, but the marching, and the worst thing about the marching was the boots, that he had seen a stork's nest on a church tower in a town that no longer had a church. Once, in the second summer, he wrote a single sentence: "I do not think I shall be much use to anybody afterwards, but I should like to see that roof mended." Frances wrote back, "Then you will have to come and mend it, because nobody else here can be trusted with a ladder." He never signed his name. That was the rule, and both of them kept it, and by the third winter the not signing had stopped being a rule and become something else. It became a kind of privacy they had built together. He was not a rank and not a family and not a fortune. He was a hand in pencil and a turn of mind, and she found she knew him better for it than she knew any man in Wiltshire who had bowed to her by name. The last letter came in December of 1813. It was short, and it was written by somebody else in a clerk's copperplate, because the hand that usually wrote it could not. It said that number 41 had been carried off the field at the Neve on the 10th, and that his condition was thought to be mortal, and that he had asked that this be sent. And it ended with 11 words that were plainly his own, and had plainly been dictated with difficulty. Read it twice, once for the news, once for the man. Frances Marlowe was 20 years old. She read it once, quickly, standing in the passage of the vicarage with her cloak still on. She never once managed the second reading. She wrote to the committee in London 3 times over the following year. The committee had been dissolved. Their papers had gone to a warehouse in Southwark, and the warehouse had a fire in 1815, and nobody living had a list of which number belonged to which man. Her father died in the spring of 1814. The living went to a new man with a wife and 4 daughters and a great deal of energy. Frances packed the vicarage in 9 days, and at the bottom of her trunk, under the linen, she put a bundle of 31 letters written in pencil and a small marbled commonplace book in which, over 3 winters, she had copied out fair versions of everything she had sent. She had copied them because that was what you did with letters you were proud of, when you were 17 and had never been proud of anything. She was 24 now, and she had not opened the book in 4 years, and she had not once considered burning it, and she was about to find out what that had cost her. Ashcott Park had 31 rooms, and Frances Marlowe slept in the smallest. That was not a complaint. It faced east. It was warm in the mornings, and it was hers, or as near to hers as anything got. Her aunt, Mrs. Augusta Caudry, was scrupulous about the word. Nothing in that house belonged to Frances. Everything in that house was given to her, daily, freshly, and could therefore be mentioned daily and freshly, which it was. Frances had been there 11 years. In that time she had learned exactly what she was for. She was for making up numbers at dinner when a guest canceled. She was for sitting with Mrs. Caudry when Mrs. Caudry's head ached, which was constantly, and for reading aloud in the dark for 2 hours at a time. She was for the accounts, because Sir Henry Caudry could not add and would not admit it. She was for taking the soup to the tenants in the rain, because it looked well in the parish, and Selina would not go. And most of all, she was for standing next to Selina. Selina Caudry was 22, fair, and genuinely beautiful, which is the thing people forget about her sort. She was not a joke. She had a real, hard, working charm, and she deployed it the way a good gunner lays a gun. She had been out 3 seasons. She had refused a baronet and been refused by an earl, and the second of those was eating her alive from the inside. And everybody in that house paid for it in small installments every single day. She had never liked Frances, but she had not hated her until the summer of 1817, when a visiting colonel of militia had spent 40 minutes at dinner talking to the poor cousin about the peninsula, and had told Selina afterwards, kindly, that her cousin was the most interesting woman in Wiltshire. Selina had not forgotten it. Selina did not forget anything. She found the book on the 9th of October. It was in Frances's trunk, under the linen, and Selina had gone into that room to look for a shawl she suspected of having been borrowed, and had found instead a small marbled notebook, and had opened it standing at the window in the good light, and had read the first page. To number 41, the 14th of November. I have been given a number and no other thing whatsoever. Selina Caudry sat down on the edge of her cousin's narrow bed and read for a quarter of an hour, and by the end of it she was smiling in a way that would have frightened anybody who saw it. Love letters, 4 years of them, from a woman of 24 with £14 a year and no prospects, to a man with no name, who had been dead since before Waterloo. Selina did not take the book. She put it back exactly where she had found it, under the linen, with the corner at the angle she had found it at. Then she went downstairs and asked her mother whether the Duke of Ellesmere's acceptance had come. It had come that morning. The Duke of Ellesmere had been a duke for 14 months, and he was still, in every way that mattered, extremely bad at it. Gabriel Ashworth was 33. He was the son of a younger son, and he had been put into the army at 16 because there was nothing else to do with him, and he had come out of it 11 years later as a major of the 95th Rifles with a shattered left hip, a hole in the hearing of his left ear from a French 12-pounder at Waterloo, and no money whatsoever. Then in the spring of 1816 a fever had gone through his father's family like a scythe through wheat, and taken his uncle and both his cousins inside 5 weeks, and Gabriel Ashworth had inherited a dukedom, 4 estates, and £41,000 a year. Nobody had ever thought to teach him what to do with it. He had been taught to march men in the dark, hold a position with insufficient ammunition, and write to the mothers of the dead. So he did what he knew. He spent the first year of his dukedom looking for his men. Not in a sentimental way, in a quartermaster's way. He had the muster rolls of 3 companies copied out, and he went through them line by line. And where a man was living, he found out what the man needed. And where a man was dead, he found out who was left. It was slow, ugly, unglamorous work. It took him into rookeries in Deptford and workhouses in Norfolk, and one very bad afternoon into a pauper burial ground in Bristol, where 4 of his riflemen were in a pit with 200 other people. By the autumn of 1817, he had accounted for 611 men out of a possible 940. He had put money into 83 households. He had, entirely by accident, become the most talked about unmarried man in England, because there is nothing the world enjoys so much as a rich man doing a good thing badly explained. The talk did not describe him as kind. The talk described him as cold, deaf, rude, and probably mad. 3 of those were true, in a manner of speaking. He was not cold. He was extremely tired, in a way that 4 years had not touched. He was not rude. He was deaf in the left ear, and he had discovered in 14 months of drawing rooms that if you fail to hear a remark and ask a woman to repeat it, she assumes you found the remark stupid, and she is never entirely wrong. He came to Ashcot Park because Sir Henry Caudry's brother had been a colonel of the 52nd and had died in the breach at Badajoz, and Gabriel had promised the man's widow he would look at the family's claim on the Compassionate Fund. That was all. He intended to stay 2 nights. He arrived on the 21st of October at 4 in the afternoon, in the rain, on horseback, having sent his carriage on ahead with his valet in it because he could not stand 3 hours in a box. Frances Marlowe was in the stable yard when he came in. She was there because a tenant's child had cut his hand on a scythe blade that morning, and she had gone down with linen and basilicum powder, and she was coming back across the yard with the empty basket when 6 horses came through the arch at once, and the whole place turned into noise. She stepped back against the wall to be out of the way. The Duke of Ellesmere swung down off a gray hunter about 9 feet from her, and she saw a tall man with rain running off the brim of his hat, moving stiffly, favoring the left side, handing his reins to a groom without looking at him because he was already looking at the horses off for. "He's picked something up," he said to the groom, near the frog. "Don't let them turn him out till it's seen to." Then he limped away toward the house and never saw her at all. Frances stood in the wet with the empty basket and thought, without any particular feeling, there is a man who came home. She thought it about a great many men. It had stopped hurting somewhere around 1816. It had become simply a thing she noticed, the way you notice weather. She went in through the kitchen door and up the back stairs, and she did not think about the Duke of Ellesmere again until 8 o'clock the following evening, when her cousin Selina stood up at the dinner table with a small marbled book in her hand. There were 22 at table. Frances had been placed at the far end, on the left, between the deaf Mrs. Pargeter and an empty chair, which was where she was always placed, and which she preferred, because it meant she could get through a dinner without speaking and get out at the end without anybody noticing. The Duke was at the other end at Mrs. Caudry's right hand, 30 feet away, and had said perhaps 40 words in 2 hours. Frances had watched him, in the way she watched everyone, without appearing to. She saw that he turned his head slightly to the right when anybody spoke to him. She saw that he had eaten almost nothing. She saw that twice. When the whole table laughed, he had laughed a fraction of a second late, and that both times his eyes had gone across the faces first to find out what the joke was. She knew exactly what that was. Her father had gone deaf on one side in his last 3 years. The plates were changed. The second course came and went. And in the small pause afterwards, while the sweet things were coming in, Selina Caudry stood up. "Now," Selina said, "before we go through, I must beg the company's indulgence, because I have made the most extraordinary discovery, and it is far too good to keep." "Mrs. Caudry said, comfortably, Selina, whatever are you at?" "Literature, Mama." Selina held up the little marbled book. "There is an authoress under this roof, a poetess, very nearly, and she has never breathed one word of it to any of us." Frances Marlowe felt the whole room go a long way away. She knew the book. She knew the marbling on the cover. She had bought it for 1 shilling and 9 pence in Salisbury in 1810. "Selina," she said. Her voice did not carry. It was not intended to. It was the small, flat voice of a woman asking for something in a house where she had never once been given anything for the asking. "Now, you shall not be modest," Selina said brightly, without looking at her. "Ladies and gentlemen, my cousin Miss Marlowe, at the far end there, spent the war writing letters to a soldier, a most romantic scheme. The ladies wrote to the poor men who had nobody. Only listen, she has copied out every word she sent." Somebody laughed. It was not a cruel laugh yet. It was the laugh of a table that has had 4 glasses of wine and does not yet know where a thing is going. "Selina, put it down." "To number 41, Selina read. And the room settled to listen, because Selina read well. She always had. And because there is nothing on this earth an English dinner table likes better than a person being read aloud. To number 41, the 14th of November. I have been given a number and no other thing whatsoever, and so I do not know whether I am writing to a boy of 18 or a man of 50, and I do not know whether you can read this yourself, And if you cannot, I hope very much that the person reading it to you is a friend and not a wit. The laughter this time was bigger. Somebody said, "Oh, poor Miss Marlowe." Frances sat absolutely still with her hands in her lap. "There is a great deal about a church roof," Selina said, turning pages. "Here, listen. You ask what I look like, and I shall not tell you because you have not told me, and because if I describe myself honestly, you will stop writing, and if I describe myself dishonestly, I shall have to keep it up for the length of a war." That got a real laugh, a long one, and Selina waited it out with a small pleased smile, and Frances understood, with terrible clarity, that her cousin had chosen well. She had not chosen the cruelest passages. She had chosen the ones that were charming, because the joke was not that the letters were bad. The joke was that they were good, and that they had been written by nobody, to nobody, for nothing. "Now this," Selina said, "is my very favorite. This is the third winter. I read your letters twice, once quickly, standing up wherever I am, to know that you are alive, and once slowly, at night, sitting down, to know who you are. I have never told you my name, and you have never told me yours, and I find I have come to think of that as the truest thing about us. Everybody in this house knows my name. Not one of them knows one single thing about me." The table did not laugh at that one. There was a small silence, the kind that happens when a joke walks too near something. Selina, sensing the room, gave a little laugh of her own to cover it and turned the page briskly. "And of course the very best part is that the gentleman was killed in 1813, so we shall never know whether he even—" 41. The voice came from the other end of the table. It was not loud. It did not need to be. It was the flat carrying voice of a man giving an order across ground, and it went the length of that table and stopped everything in it. Selina Caudry looked up. The Duke of Ellesmere was sitting entirely still with his hand flat on the cloth beside his glass. "I beg your pardon, your grace. You said a number. Say it again." He turned his head slightly to the right. "I am deaf on that side. You will have to say it to the whole room." There was a pause. 22 people looked at Selina Caudry, and Selina Caudry, who had spent 3 seasons learning precisely how to hold a room, discovered that a room can be handed to you in a way you do not want it. 41, she said. "Number 41. It is only how the scheme—" "I have been given a number and no other thing whatsoever," said the Duke of Ellesmere, "and so I do not know whether I am writing to a boy of 18 or a man of 50. He was not reading. He had no book. He was looking at the candles in the middle of the table. "And if you cannot read this yourself, I hope very much that the person reading it to you is a friend and not a wit." He paused. He was neither. He was a Welshman named Price, and he had opinions about the churchwarden. Nobody moved. Frances Marlowe had stopped breathing somewhere around the word Welshman. The Duke of Ellesmere pushed his chair back and stood up. He did it slowly because of the hip, and the slowness of it made the whole thing worse and better at once. He put 2 fingers into the breast of his coat and took out a folded paper. It had been folded into eighths and refolded so many times that the creases had gone through and been mended twice with a strip of gummed paper along the back. "I have carried this," he said, "for 4 years and 11 months. I carried it at Toulouse. I carried it at Waterloo. When they cut my coat off me at Mont Saint-Jean, it was in the lining, and a corporal of the 95th put it in his boot and gave it back to me 9 days later in a barn. And I have never in my life been more grateful to any man for anything." He unfolded it. "You have read Miss Marlowe's letters aloud to this table for your amusement?" he said. "Very well. I shall read one properly." And he read it. He read it the way you read something you have known by heart for years and are only holding the paper out of respect. He read it slowly and without any performance at all. And that was the thing that broke the room, because Selina had read it as comedy, and he read it exactly as it had been written, which was as one person talking to another in the dark. It was the letter of the second winter. It was about the flood in the churchyard. It was about her father, who was beginning to lose his words and had preached the same sermon twice in a month, and nobody had told him. It was about being 19 and being afraid that the whole of her life was going to happen in one village to somebody nobody looked at. And it ended, "I am aware that I am writing all this to a number, and that you may be dead this fortnight, and that you may not care for any of it. But there is nobody here I can say it to. So I say it to you. Do not feel obliged to answer this one. Only tell me you are alive, and I shall be content." He folded the letter along its old creases. "I answered it," he said. "It took 11 weeks to reach her, because we were in the mountains. I told her I was alive. I did not tell her my name, because the rules of the thing were that I should not, and because a man in the condition I was in that winter had no name worth the giving." He looked down the length of the table. "My name is Gabriel Ashworth. In 1810, I was a lieutenant in the 95th Rifles with no family living, and I had not had a letter in 9 years. The committee gave me the number 41. "Mrs. Augusta Caudry said faintly, "Your Grace." "Sit down, madam. I have nearly finished." He had not raised his voice once. "I was carried off the field at the Neve on the 10th of December, 1813. I was not expected to live, and a clerk wrote to say so, and by the time I was fit to hold a pen, the committee had been dissolved and their papers were in a warehouse in Southwark. That warehouse burned in 1815. There is no list. I have spent 4 years unable to discover the name of the only person who wrote to me during 11 years of soldiering." He turned his head, and for the first time he looked down the table to the far end, past Mrs. Pargeter, to the woman in gray sitting beside an empty chair. "I have found her at a dinner party," he said, "being laughed at." Frances Marlowe stood up. She had no plan of any kind. She simply found that she was on her feet, and that 22 people were looking at her, and that the room was going in and out very slightly at the edges. "The roof," she said. Her voice came out cracked and far too quiet, and she stopped and swallowed and made it work. "The hole in the church roof at Ashcott. You said you should like to see it mended?" "You said I should have to come and do it myself," said the Duke of Ellesmere, "because nobody there could be trusted with a ladder." And Frances Marlowe, who had not cried at her father's funeral, who had not cried in 11 years in that house, put her hand over her mouth and stood in front of 22 people and cried. They put her in the small drawing room because it was the nearest door. Mrs. Caudry had a great deal to say, and Sir Henry had a great deal to say, and Selina had gone extremely white and said nothing at all. And the Duke of Ellesmere heard none of it, or affected to hear none of it, being deaf on that side, and simply walked out of the dining room after Francis and shut the door behind him. She was standing at the far window with her back to the room, and she had got herself under control by the time he came in, mostly, which she would have said was the single most useful skill of her life. "I beg your pardon," she said, without turning. "That was very badly done of me." "Which part?" "All of it. Standing up. The rest." "Miss Marlowe," he said, "I have been in 3 general actions, and I have never once seen a room take a heavier hit than that one, and it was not fired by me." Frances laughed. It came out wrong, half a sob, and she pressed her fingers under her eyes and took a breath. Then she turned around. He was standing well back, near the door, with his hat in his hand, keeping the whole width of the room between them, and she understood at once that he had done it deliberately. "You are angry," he said, Yes. Yes. I thought you would be. He nodded slowly. Would you tell me why I have had 4 years to prepare an answer to almost everything, but not to that? Because I buried you, Frances said. It came out of her like something coming loose. I had a letter in a clerk's hand telling me you were dying. I read it once. I have never been able to read it twice. I wrote to London 3 times. I went to Salisbury and sat in a coach office for 4 hours to find out how one applies to the committee, and the answer was that one does not. Because there is no committee? Her voice was rising, and she let it. I was 20. My father was dying in the next room. And for 4 years I have carried the fact that a man I knew better than anyone alive died in a Spanish river valley in December, and that I do not know his name. So I cannot even find where he is. So I have never once been able to stand anywhere and say, there he is. The Duke of Ellesmere stood absolutely still. And you have been in England for 2 years, Frances said. Yes. 2 years. Miss Marlowe, I did not know you existed. I knew a hand and a village. There are 11 Ashcots in England. I have a list of them. I have visited 4. He said it without any defense in his voice at all, simply as fact. I did not come here looking for you. I came here about a widow's claim. If you tell me to go tonight, I will go tonight. And the roof at Ashcot will be mended by Lady Day, whether I ever see you again or not. Frances put her hand out and found the back of a chair and held it. 11, she said. You have a list of 11 Ashcots. I have a list of 206 villages, said the Duke of Ellesmere. It is in a book in my saddlebag. Ashcot in Wiltshire is on the 3rd page, and it has been crossed off since June, because I wrote to the vicar here in the spring, asking whether any lady of the parish had corresponded with the army, and the vicar wrote back that he had been in the living 3 years and knew nothing of it. Frances shut her eyes. He would not, she said. He wouldn't. He has 4 daughters and no interest in anything that happened before he came. No. You wrote to my father's house, Frances said, and a man who has slept in my father's bedroom for 3 years told you I did not exist. Yes. The clock ticked. Somewhere beyond 2 doors the dinner party was still going on, in a fashion which is the most English fact in this entire account. Miss Marlowe, Gabriel said, I would like to ask you something, and I want you to understand before I ask it that there is no answer you can give which will offend me, and no answer which will alter the roof. Ask. Do you want to be found? Frances opened her eyes. Nobody had ever asked her a question like that in her life. 11 years of fetch that. Read to me, stand there, make up the numbers, and here was a man across a room asking her permission to exist. Yes, she said. Then I shall stay 3 days, said the Duke of Ellesmere, and we shall talk in the daytime like sensible people, and I shall not read anything aloud. The 3 days became 9. He did not stay at Ashcot Park. He moved himself to the inn at Ashcot Village on the 2nd morning, which Mrs. Caudry experienced as a wound she would carry for the rest of her natural life, and which Gabriel did with the flat courtesy of a man who has decided something and will not discuss it. Every morning at 10 he walked up to the house, or Frances walked down to the church, and they went at it slowly, the way 2 people do when they have 4 years of arrears to make up and are both terrified of getting it wrong. They found out the ordinary things they had never known, that she was 24 and he was 33, that she had a chipped front tooth from falling out of an apple tree at 9, that he could not smell anything at all since Waterloo and had never told a soul, and that this was much stranger to live with than the ear. And on the 4th day, in the vestry of the church at Ashcot, with the rain coming in through the hole in the shape of Ireland and dropping into a bucket she had put there herself 2 years before, Francis Marlowe gave him the register. It was a ledger, quarto, bound in green board, and it weighed 4 pounds. "What is this?" "The committee's books," Francis said, "for this parish and the 6 around it. My father was the secretary of it because clergymen always are, and when the London committee was dissolved, they sent the parish copies back rather than pay to store them, and my father died before he could do anything with them, and I put them in a trunk." Gabriel Ashworth opened it. 31 ladies of the parish of Ashcott, and their assigned numbers, and beside the numbers, in the London clerk's copperplate, the names. Every man, every regiment, every company, and where it was known, and it was known in more than half the cases, because the men who had nobody had had to give the committee somebody the name of a parish, an old master, a workhouse, a next of kin at one remove. 406 men. The Duke of Ellesmere sat down on the vestry chest very suddenly. "Miss Marlowe." "I know what it is," Francis said. "I have known since the day the warehouse burned. I did not know who to give it to. I wrote to the Horse Guards in 1816 and had a printed acknowledgment." She stopped. "I could not give it to anyone here. If I had told my aunt I possessed anything of value at all, it would have been sold within the fortnight, and the money would have gone on Selina's season." He was going down the pages with one finger, and he had stopped somewhere on the second. "Price," he said. "Price. Owen. Rifleman. 95th. Mother living. Landfair Carinian. Care of the parish." He looked up, and his face had gone entirely open. "He has a mother. He told me for 11 years he had nobody. He gave the committee his mother, and never once—" He stopped and put the flat of his hand over his mouth for a second. "He died at Vittoria," he said into his hand. "I have had his pack in a box in Derbyshire for 4 years because there was nowhere on this earth to send it." Frances Marlowe stood in the vestry of her father's church with the rain coming through the roof, and watched a man she had written to for 3 winters find out that he could finish something. "Then send it," she said. The Ellesmere Fund took offices in Bedford Row in December. Gabriel would have called it something else, or nothing at all, but his solicitor pointed out that subscribers give money to things with names, and Gabriel discovered that he wanted subscribers, because 406 had turned into 1900 once other parishes began sending in their books, and one dukedom was not going to be enough. He asked Frances Marlowe to run the register. He asked her properly, in front of a witness, with a salary attached, at £80 a year, and rooms with a respectable widow in Bloomsbury, who had been the mother of a sergeant of the 52nd. Mrs. Augusta Caudry's reaction to this cannot be printed. Frances left Ashcott Park on the 9th of December, 1817. With one trunk, her aunt did not come down. Sir Henry shook her hand in the hall and said, unexpectedly, gruffly, "You did the accounts better than any man I ever hired," and gave her £3 out of his own pocket, which was the single kindest thing that had happened to her in that house in 11 years. Selina watched from the landing and said nothing at all. The work was not romantic in the slightest. Frances sat in a cold room in Bedford Row from 9 until 7, 6 days a week, cross-referencing muster rolls against parish books against 1900 lines of a dead clerk's copperplate, and writing, by hand, an average of 11 letters a day to overseers of the poor in places she had never heard of. She had never been happier in her life. Gabriel was there most days. He had a table in the same room, because he refused a separate office on the grounds that it was a waste of a fire, and Frances learned very quickly to take the chair on his right. She never mentioned it. She simply always took that side, and after the first fortnight he stopped turning his head when she spoke, and after the second month she noticed that when other people came into the room, he arranged himself so that she was on his right without appearing to arrange anything at all. They developed the small vocabulary of 2 people working She learned that when he went silent and rubbed his thumb along the edge of the table, it meant the hip was bad and that he would deny it. She learned to move the fire screen an inch and say nothing. He learned that when she read a letter twice, she was going to argue with him about it. "You read that one twice?" "I did." "Then I am about to be wrong about something." "You are about to be wrong about Corporal Sharp of Melton," Francis said. "You have him down as refusing the money out of pride. He has not refused it. He cannot write, and he has had the overseer write for him, and the overseer is skimming it. Look at the hand. That is the same hand as the Whitwell letter, and Whitwell is 9 miles off, and we have had 2 refusals from that man's district and no others in the entire county." Gabriel Ashworth looked at the 2 letters side by side for a long moment. Then he said, "I shall go to Melton on Thursday." And later that afternoon, Francis heard him telling his solicitor in the next room, with something in his voice she could not name. She found it in the handwriting. "It could not last. Of course, it never does." The paragraph appeared in a Sunday paper on the 8th of February, and it was clever because it did not name her. It said that a certain ducal charitable enterprise much praised in these pages was managed in its particulars by a young person of no family, whose acquaintance with his grace had begun in the most novel manner conceivable by correspondence, during the late war, conducted anonymously, and, it was understood, at some length. It said that the lady had been prodigal of her pen. It said that the number of gallant recipients was believed to be not fewer than 11. It called her the letter-writing coquette. It was Selina. Of course it was Selina. It took a week to be sure of it, and it was never provable, and it did not matter in the smallest degree, because by then it had gone everywhere. The number 11 was the poison, and the number 11 was true. The committee had assigned each lady more than one correspondent, because there were always more soldiers than ladies. Francis Marlowe had written to 11 men across 3 winters. 9 of them had exchanged perhaps 4 letters with her and stopped, or died, or gone home to Cork and never written again. Number 41 was the only one who lasted. But 11 in print, next to the word coquette, is not a fact. It is a verdict. Subscriptions to the fund were withdrawn 4 large ones in 9 days. A bishop who had promised to sit on the committee discovered a prior engagement, and on the 19th of February the Dowager Duchess of Ellesmere, who was Gabriel's aunt by marriage and the only relation he had left, came to Bedford Row in person, sat down in the cold outer office in furs, and said what she had come to say in front of 2 clerks and Francis Marlowe. "You may keep her, Gabriel. Nobody supposes otherwise, and nobody would care. What you may not do is marry her, and every soul in London now believes that you intend to." And 11 men, and a dinner table, and a girl standing up and crying in front of the Caudry's guests. That is the whole story as it is told, and it will not be untold. The Dowager did not look at Francis once. "You will finish this business of yours, which is admirable, and you will marry Lady Caroline Ferrers in the autumn, and in 3 years nobody will remember any of it." When she had gone, the room was very quiet. "Miss Marlowe," Gabriel said at last, "I am going to say a great many things to you, and I find I cannot say any of them in this office. Will you—" "There is a letter from Deptford," Francis said. She had it in her hand. She had opened it while the Dowager was speaking, because her hands had needed something to do. "Francis?" "It is Bell," she said. "Corporal James Bell of the 95th, number 309 in the register, and the overseer says he is in a court off Butcher Row, and he is not expected to see the week out, and he is asking for the officer." They went that night. It was the 21st of February, and there was a fog off the river of the kind London used to have, brown and solid, that you could taste like a penny on the tongue, and the coach could not get past the top of Butcher Row, so they walked the last 200 yards with a link boy and Gabriel's groom carrying a lantern that lit up about 4 feet of anything. Frances had been told to stay in the coach. Frances had got out of the coach. The court was 11 feet across. There was a standpipe frozen solid and a smell that she never afterwards had words for. And the room was on the 2nd floor at the back, and there was no fire in it, and the window had been stuffed with rags. Corporal James Bell was 34 years old and weighed about 6 stone. He had been a rifleman for 9 years and a costermonger for 2 and consumptive for 1, and there was a woman there who had been his wife for 8 months and who was 17, and who was the one who had found the fund's advertisement in a paper somebody had wrapped fish in. Gabriel Ashworth went down on his knees on the boards beside the pallet, which cost him a great deal, and said, "Bell." And the man on the pallet got his eyes open and said, in a thread of a voice, "Sir, beg pardon, sir, can't get up." "Nobody is getting up. Lie still." "They said the major was dead at the Neve." "They were premature." Bell laughed, and the laugh turned into something that went on for a long time and left him gray. "They got him out." "It took 4 hours. Gabriel sent the groom for a surgeon and the link boy for hot bricks, and Frances went down and paid a woman on the ground floor 11 shillings for every blanket in her possession, and paid a man at the corner of the row 4 shillings to go and knock up a chandler and come back with candles and coal. And she made a fire in a grate that had not had one in a fortnight, on her knees, in her good gray dress, with her hands black to the wrist. At 2 in the morning they carried Corporal Bell down a staircase 18 inches wide on a door taken off its hinges, and Gabriel took the bottom end, which was the heavy end, and the hip gave on the last 3 steps, and he went down on one knee and did not let go of the door. They put Bell in the Duke of Ellesmere's coach on the Duke of Ellesmere's cloak, and his 17-year-old wife beside him, and sent them to the house in Grosvenor Street, where there were 4 fires lit and a surgeon by the time they arrived. Then Gabriel Ashworth sat down on the mounting block at the corner of Butcher Row in the fog, and put his head in his hands and could not stop shaking. Frances sat down beside him on the stone. She did not say anything. She had learned that much at 17, in a vicarage, with a father who was frightened. 11 months, Gabriel said into his hands. "He has been in that room 11 months. I had his name in the register in December, Francis. I went to Melton in January because of a man being skimmed of 9 shillings a quarter, and I did not go to Deptford, because Deptford was crossed off, because I went to Deptford in 1816 and asked at the wrong parish." "Yes." "That is all. That is the whole of it. I asked at the wrong parish?" "Yes," Francis said, "and if you had not gone at all, he would have died in that room in the dark, and his wife would have gone on the parish at 17. And instead he is asleep in a warm bed in Grosvenor Street with a surgeon, and she is sitting beside him, and whatever happens now, he does not die in that room." She said it steadily. "You cannot have both. You cannot have the good of it and also refuse the arithmetic of it. 1900 men, Gabriel. You are one man with a bad hip and a list." He lifted his head and looked at her. Her hands were black. There was soot on her cheek and along her jaw where she had pushed her hair back. Her dress was ruined past any mending. She was sitting on a mounting block in Deptford at 2 in the morning, talking arithmetic to him in the fog. "You called me Gabriel," he said. Frances Marlowe went absolutely still. Then she said, "I have called you Gabriel in my head since the 4th day at Ashcot, and I have been extremely careful, and I am too tired tonight to be careful." He reached out with one hand and took hers, black to the wrist, and held it. "I am going to say it here," he said, "because if I wait until I am somewhere respectable, I shall dress it up, and you have had enough of being read aloud in nice rooms. Gabriel, I have been in love with you since I was 26 years old and did not know your face or your name or the color of your hair. I have loved you as a hand in ink for 11 weeks at a time in the mountains, and I have loved you across a table in Bedford Row for 4 months. And the second is worse, because now I know what your voice does when you have found something in the handwriting. Frances began, silently, to cry, which she was going to be angry about later. My aunt is right about one thing and wrong about everything else, Gabriel said. She is right that if I marry you, they will say what she said. 11 men and a dinner table. You will be the letter-writing coquette in every drawing room in England for 2 years at the least, and there will be no defending it, because it cannot be answered, because it is not an argument. It is a snigger. I know what it is. Then I will not ask you tonight, he said. I will not ask you until you have seen the whole size of it, because you have spent 11 years being handed things and told daily what they cost you, and I am damned if I will be the next man to do it. Frances Marlowe wiped her face with the back of a black hand, which made it a great deal worse. Then when... The general meeting is on the 11th of March, Gabriel said. Every subscriber, every trustee, my aunt has taken a box at the Argyle room so as to be seen elsewhere. It will be the worst room in England for you, and I have to be in it, and you have to be in it, because you are the register, and there is not a man alive who can answer questions about it but you. He stood up and got his hip under him and put out his hand to her. See it. See exactly what it is. And on the 12th of March I will ask you, and you may say no, and the answer will make no difference whatsoever to the £80 a year or to the roof at Ashcott. Frances took his hand and stood up off the mounting block. You are a very difficult man to be loved by, she said. I have been told... The general meeting of the subscribers to the Ellesmere Fund was held at 11 in the morning on the 11th of March, 1818. In a long room off Holborn hired for the purpose, and 210 people came. They did not all come for the charity. Frances sat at the end of the table on the platform with the register in front of her and 2 clerks behind her, and she wore gray, and she had her hands folded on the green board cover, and she was perfectly aware of the sound the room was making. It was not a hostile sound. It was worse. It was the light, pleasant, buzzing sound of a great many well-dressed people looking at a woman they have read about. Selina Caudry was in the 4th row with her mother. Frances saw her at once and thought, quite clearly, she came to watch it land. The chairman read the accounts. The treasurer read the subscriptions, which were down by £900 on the quarter, and the room made a small, satisfied noise at that. And Frances kept her hands folded. And then a gentleman in the 5th row stood up and asked, with enormous courtesy, whether the trustees were entirely satisfied as to the provenance of the register upon which the whole enterprise depended, given the, he was sure, greatly exaggerated reports concerning the manner of its coming into the fund's possession. The room went quiet and pleasant and awful. Frances Marlowe stood up. I can answer that, sir, she said, since I am the report. And that was the moment. She had thought about it for 19 days, and she had drafted 11 answers, and she had burnt all of them, and standing up she found that she was not going to use any of them. My name is Frances Marlowe. I am the daughter of the vicar of Ashcott in Wiltshire. In 1810 I was 17 years old, and I joined a committee of 31 women in a cold church hall, and we were given the numbers of soldiers who received no letters from anybody. I was given 11 numbers over 3 years, and I wrote to all 11, and I am not going to stand in this room and pretend I did not, because it is written in the book in front of me in my father's hand, and anybody may come up and read it. 2 of those men wrote back once. 4 never wrote at all. 3 were killed, and I know it because the committee told me. 1 went home to Cork, and I hope he is there still. And one of them wrote to me for 3 winters, and I did not know his name, and he did not know mine, and there was nothing improper in one single line of it, and you would all know that perfectly well if you had heard any of it read out by somebody who was not trying to be funny. She put her hand flat on the green cover. This register contains the names of 1,941 men who told the army they had nobody. It is the only copy in England. It exists because 31 women in Wiltshire wrote letters to strangers in a war, and because a clerk in London wrote their names down, and because my father was too disorganized to throw anything away. She stopped. You may make what you like of me. I have been the joke at that end of a dinner table for 11 years, and I find that I have grown a very thick skin about it. But I would ask this room to be careful about laughing at the register, because it is not mine. It belongs to the men in it. She sat down, and into the silence, from the very back of the long room by the door, a man said, 309, Mrs. Every head in that room turned. Corporal James Bell was standing at the back, holding on to the doorframe with one hand and his wife with the other. He should not have been standing anywhere. He had 11 months to live, as it turned out, and he spent 4 of them in Derbyshire in the sun, which is 4 more than he was going to get. Behind him there were others. They had come up from Deptford and from Chelsea and from Woolwich, in whatever they had, 17 of them, and they had been standing in the passage for an hour and a half because nobody had liked to tell them to come in. Beg pardon, Bell said. We'll not stop. Only they said in here there was a question about whether the book was honest. He got his breath. It's honest. Number 309, that's me. She wrote it down. An elderly man in the second row stood up, turned round, and began, deliberately, to applaud. He was a general officer of 40 years' service, and it was the only interesting thing he ever did in his life, and it was enough, because the row behind him stood, and then the platform stood, and then all 210 of them were on their feet, and the noise in that room went on for a very long time. Frances Marlowe sat quite still through the whole of it with her hands on the green cover of the register, because she had discovered that she could not stand up. Selina Caudry left before the end. She was seen going out by the side door. 2 years later, she married a man of 48 who dealt in West India stock and had a house at Clapham, and she was tolerably comfortable, and she told the story of that morning exactly twice in her life, both times drunk, both times as though she had been in the front row applauding. He asked her the next morning, the 12th of March, in the office at Bedford Row at 9:30, with both clerks sent out on invented errands and the fire not yet properly caught. He did not go down on one knee, because the hip would not have allowed him to get up again, and they had both had quite enough theater. He put a letter on the desk in front of her. It was folded into eighths. It was new paper. She had never seen it before. You are to read it twice, he said. Those are the terms. Frances Marlowe unfolded it. It was 2 pages. It was in pencil, in that hard, slanted hand she had known since she was 17, because he had done it in pencil deliberately, and it began, to number 41's correspondent, whose name I have known for 142 days and have not yet finished being astonished by. She read it once, quickly, standing up, the way she had read every letter he had ever sent her, to know that he was alive. Then she sat down in the chair on his right and put her hand flat on the desk and read it slowly, to know who he was. At the bottom of the second page, under everything else, in a hand that had pressed hard enough to go through the paper, was a single line that had never once appeared on any letter he had sent her in 8 years. Gabriel Ashworth. Well, he said, that took some doing. Frances looked up at him and found she was laughing and crying at the same time, which she had always considered a stupid thing that only happened in novels. Yes, she said. You have not heard the question. I have read it twice, said Francis Marlowe. Yes. They were married on the 2nd of May, 1818, in the church at Ashcott in Wiltshire, under a roof that had been mended in February by 4 men from Salisbury, and one duke who insisted on going up the ladder himself and was very nearly killed by a slipping batten, to the immense satisfaction of everybody watching. There were 11 people from London at the wedding. 9 of them were riflemen. Mrs. Augusta Caudry attended, having discovered in herself over the course of 6 weeks a deep and long-standing affection for her late cousin's daughter, whom she had always regarded quite as her own. Francis received her with perfect courtesy and never once discussed it with anybody, which those who knew her best considered the most frightening thing she ever did. The Dowager Duchess of Ellesmere did not attend. She came round in 1821, when the fund was granted its royal charter and there was a levee, and she told everybody thereafter that she had always said the girl had bottom. The Ellesmere fund traced 4,006 men in the end. It ran for 31 years. Frances Ashworth, Duchess of Ellesmere, kept the register herself for the first 9 of them and then trained the woman who kept it after her. And it is in a library in London now, 4 pounds of green board and copper plate. And if you know how to ask, you can still put your hand on it. There is a mark against number 41. It is not the clerk's hand, and it is not her father's. It was made in pencil, later, by somebody who pressed hard enough to go through the paper. They lived mostly in Derbyshire, in a house with a great many fires in it. She always took the chair on his right. He never in 34 years learned to smell anything at all, and she never in 34 years let him find out that she had known about it since the 4th day at Ashcott, because he had told her it was a thing he had never told a soul, and she was not going to be the one who took that away from him. And on the 14th of November every year, which was the anniversary of nothing anybody else could see, he wrote her a letter. He put it under her door in the morning like a schoolboy. It was never long. It was always in pencil. And she always read it twice, once quickly, standing up, wherever she happened to be, and once slowly, sitting down at night. Thank you for listening to this historical romance. If the moment the Duke stood up at that dinner table and said the number out loud gave you chills, you are not alone, and I would love to know where in the story it got you. There is nothing better than watching a woman who has spent 11 years being the joke at the end of the table discover that somebody was reading her twice the whole time. If you enjoyed the slow, quiet build between Francis and Gabriel, please give this video a like. It genuinely helps the channel more than you know. Share it with anyone who loves a marriage built out of letters rather than ballrooms. And do subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new audio drama as we go deeper into Regency romance, marriages of convenience, wounded soldiers, and quiet women who turn out to be the strongest person in the room. Tell me in the comments if you had been given a number and nothing else. What would you have written in your very first letter to number 41?